Um, it's an honor to be with the Berlin Economic Forum. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. Uh, I've been long associated with the ICD, and I think before I begin this discussion on what we're discussing, there was a very intense discussion, which was something which I hear in every forum that I'm a part of. And today, this is the talk everywhere that we go inside, because the world is divided. There's a new rise in the power, geopolitical powers, which is rising. But then, just to share a little bit, what I'm going to share, what I'm going to discuss, what I'm going to talk right now, is largely from where business plays a very important role. Economic investments play a vital role. To begin with, I'm an economic advisor with the World Trade Centers, and I'm also a professor. In India, I've been a professor, and I'm also a professor with different universities here in Germany. Let me begin this with one of the very introductory videos that I want to give about what is this World Trade Center, what's the role of the World Trade Center, and then let's begin down to discuss further down. So to briefly begin with what I'm going to discuss on is, I began my career working with the World Trade Center. And that was the time period I really wanted to know what was this brand called as the World Trade Center. It was there in India. It's there in every country that you are from. I was one of the persons who went and criticized the World Trade Center, stating that the brand is still not known. But then, somewhere down there was this person called Osama bin Laden, due to which the World Trade Center was well known, because the WTCA, which is the US-based World Trade Center, was attacked in 2002. And then if you notice, sadly, a lot of people died. But then if you notice, people got to know what is the World Trade Center all about. It helps in trade, investments, trade promotion. It integrates the whole world together. 193 countries are integrated together for the trade and the trade promotional activities that happen with the World Trade Center. What am I going to discuss today? I'm going to discuss on three sections of it. One is as an economic advisor that I've come here to share what is the World Trade Center and the role of the World Trade Centers. The second is based on an introduction of what is this global trade all about, because we speak about global trade. We speak about global trade because who controls the trade? Today, if you notice, the US and China are fighting for dominance. That's the fact which is happening geopolitically, right? But then who controls across? What's happening inside the global trade is something that we're going to discuss. The third part of it is a small framework that we're going to see, which again is something which is an answer to the existing wars, the challenges that are happening. Let's run through a little bit down just to share you how do I see the world. This is something that I always put down in every platforms, because how do I see this? There is a triangle which I put across. I see this whole world as a tripod. And in this tripod, if you notice, there are three powerful regions of the world that control the trade. There are three powerful regions of the world that control the trade. And when I showed you the World Trade Center Association, this is where it begins from. Where does it begin from? The first part of the world that I see, it's a tripod. The world is a tripod. Inside this tripod, one part of the world is the marketing part of the world, which I call this as the United States. The US is the region where the whole markets, the whole region where the trade expansion begins from. It's not just now, because right after the World War, this was the beginning. They created the finest ecosystem for business enterprises, expand globally. The markets were created with time period. As the periods progressed, they created institutions. You name the institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and to the smaller institutions such as the World Trade Centers. So that's why I mentioned on stating that one part of the world, if you notice, it's controlled by the US. The second part of the world, which I call this, is the science and technology. Any guess which part of the world is this? Science and technology. Where if you notice, last 200 years, they've kept the dominance, especially after the industrialization. Any guess? Any guess? Any guess where, if you notice, if you ask me the finest marketing, you name the world's top 10 brands, and then if you notice, it'll be from the US. But then when it comes to science and technology, it's the European Union. European Union as a whole has always emphasized inside science and technology. They created the finest industries. You name the firms, they always emphasize, they always created this. And there is third part of the world which is right now emerging, which is the main reason why there is a geopolitical war which is happening. And that's, if you notice, manufacturing and production. Now, who's holding the manufacturing and production? Asia. Asia is again dominated by China. Asia is dominated by China. It's supported by India. It's supported by Taiwan. It's supported by Turkey. It's supported by Brazil. It's supported by emerging nations which are coming inside, who are again becoming as the powerhouses for the manufacturing and production. So we see this world how it works, because any business that you take, the business works the same way. In every business that you take, a product is created, a product is manufactured, and a product is sold. The same way, if you notice, marketing, the US. The investors come from the US. The Silicon Valley. Teslas, Amazons. There's another part of the world which is science and technology, where there is core science technology, where the emphasis goes on. The third part of the world which is manufacturing and production. The production needs to happen for the whole industry to circulate. And this is where, if you notice, the whole tripod works inside the world. Now, where did all these things begin from? Let's see this across. Where did the linkage between economics and politics comes? Because the first speaker spoke about Ukraine and the issues which is happening. Today, if you notice, it's the pain of people who are migrating from one place to another place. And it's not just inside Ukraine, it's again everywhere around the world, because when people migrate from one place to another place, people lose everything and they come. And when they lose everything, it's not easy to once again create a wealth back. And that's where, if you notice, wars create migration. Challenges are there. But where did all these things begin from? That's the reason I mentioned economics has an impact on politics. Politics has an impact on economics. Now, let's have this across a brief run through of the history after the World War, the Second World War. The economic impact of the Great Depression and the Second World War was something where, if you notice, the world was entirely collapsed. Nothing was there. People didn't know how to create wealth. Everybody was on the streets. And that was the time period. The idea of the world was to create wealth for everybody. And what happened after that? The cycle is burst, and then if you notice, the cycle begins. And everybody around the world, you would have studied across about the Marshall Plan, right? The Marshall Plan was something where the US funded the world, especially Germany. They funded UK, they funded US, they funded France. They funded, till now, if you notice, the German Marshall Fund has funded around 55 trillion. And this led to the growth. And this is where, if you notice, in the 1940s, till then, the UK was dominating, right? It had its own colonies. France had its own colonies. Dutch had its own colonies. But from there, if you notice, the paradigm shift comes inside. What's the beginning? The beginning is that jobs are created. Everybody wants to start working inside. And that's where, if you notice, there is mass jobs which are created. Everybody wants to work with government jobs. State jobs were some things which were nice. I still ask my father. I asked him, how did you find it? He says, there was a point of time where we believed in trade unionization, equality. This is what my father says. He says, we believed in unionization. We believe that everybody needs to work. Everybody should be working inside, have a job, and have a decent empowerment inside their works. Because they lost everything and they wanted to create this. The 1950s to the 1980s. What did it create? I've just mentioned down 2 points. One is which is the rise of trade unionization. The second one is equality. Where did this lead to? 1980s. There were two powerful leaders of the world who changed the world. Two powerful conservative leaders emerged in the 1980s who changed the world. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. What did they create? They created much more markets. They created they asked China to open down trade. They asked India to open trade. The USSR breaks down in the beginning of the 1990s. What did they embrace? They embraced something which is nothing but the era of neoliberalism. Now, what is that neoliberalism? Somewhere down, deep down, if you ask me, I am also one of the persons who believes that markets are the one who can actually create a solution for everything. Because if you notice, markets created something different after the 1980s. There was something which was globalization that came inside in the 1990s. It changed. What did it change? I did mention down stating that what my father saw was something which was equality. What I see is different. What I see today is what I see inside everybody. Today when I ask people, people just tell me something. I want to grow rich. And if you notice, what's that created is something where I call this as the shrinkage of the governments started happening. Privatization started coming inside. Private enterprises were some things which were started being encouraged. So if you notice, the equality which we preached in the 1950s, after globalization came inside, people realized that I can create wealth. And if you notice, today we started living with something which people say, it's globalization, which means that we have started living with inequality. I can become rich, and if somebody is poor, when I ask them why you poor, they believe that I can grow rich at one point of time. Now nobody criticizes about the inequality which is prevalent in the society. And that's something which has started beginning in the 1980s onwards. And then if you notice, people did speak about the markets. People did speak about capitalism. Communism had an inglorious exit out of the whole system. After communism had an inglorious exit out of the system, capitalism was criticized, but we accepted that. Nobody said this, that capitalism is the only way of living life, because markets were the ones which were creating down. And then from there, if you notice, now, 2010 onwards, how do I see this? There's a rise of an economic equality, where the emerging, if you remember, there was a period of time when people used to say developed countries, developing countries, and underdeveloped countries. There was a period of time when there was G7 and G5, where trade and investments were happening just between few countries. These things changed. The G20 came inside. Today, India is hosting the G20. And then if you notice, 2010 onwards, there were much more tremendous changes coming inside, where the emerging nations started questioning the rights. Every dispute which was happening inside the WTO was something where, just to share a little bit of a fact, till 2000, most of the disputes which were happening in the WTO were between the US and European firms. But after 2000, most of the disputes which are there are between China and the European and the US firms. And this was the change that came inside after 2010. Now, if you notice, you see the change which is coming inside. The first change is inequality. First change is equality. The second change is inequality. We learn to accept the inequality. The third one that comes inside is, today whenever I ask people, they just say one thing: I want to become an entrepreneur. I don't want to work under somebody, because there was a point of time when my grandfather accepted the hierarchies of working. He felt that this is my life. I don't have any other choice. But today, if I ask people, they just say, it's a small firm, it's a big firm, I don't care. I head the firm. And then comes inside the challenge where, how do I get the knowledge? Because we are all moving above the value chain towards a knowledge-driven society, because learning is everywhere. I just open YouTube, I learn everything. Homeschoolings are, in fact, I was just sharing, homeschoolings are increasing. And with this increase, the world is moving towards what I call this as a knowledge-driven society. Now, I already mentioned this, stating that economic dominance leads to political dominance. Economic dominance leads to the political dominance. What is China? What was China before 30 years? Nothing. because they didn't have the economy. Today they have the economy, and the fact says right now, the intelligence says that to the US that if China occupies Taiwan, the US cannot do anything because China has more power in arms, ammunitions, strategically than what the US can give. But then if you notice, China will never go for a war because every war that it goes inside is something that creates a disturbance in the whole region, exactly like what's happening inside Europe. And this is where I mentioned this stating economics and politics are inseparable, since the economics is largely about the government policy. Government policies are certain things that always impact inside. And if you notice, I did mention this stating, what about the inequality which is prevalent inside at some points of time? Because there is, if you notice the next point which I mentioned about the fight between hunger and sustainable development. Because I see on one side of the world where there is Greta Thunberg who says that it's a big challenge because climate crisis is arising, right? Which everybody speak in every business school, we speak on every political school, diplomatic school. But then if you notice on the other side, there is hunger and people are dying every day, right? So now comes inside the challenge, which are you going to address first? Because if you remember, just last month, there was protest which was happening inside the climate change, right? Especially the protest which was happening was against the German government, stating that why are you opening the coal mines? And what did the German government say? Right now, my biggest challenge that I got to address is the price rise. And with the price rise increasing ahead, I do not care about what's going to happen about 30 years, but I care about what's going to happen today, because hunger is a bigger disease which was there. But then if you remember, there is this Pareto criterion which is there, which we got to always remember, that the world always lives in such a manner that we live at the cost of others. What do I mean by that? We live at the cost of others. I have a chocolate with me, and I need to share the chocolate. I was sharing this, in fact, that if I need to share the chocolate, I can give you half the chocolate and I can take half the chocolate. But then why should I give you? I'm going to take the whole chocolate, because if I need to sacrifice the chocolate, I lose something. And this is the world that we live across, that one part of the world is able to get everything, another part of the world is not able to get everything. Now, in spite of all these challenges, how do we overcome is one of the things which is there. And I always mention this, stating that the increase in migration due to the wars, because if you remember, the last discussion was the same thing, that increase in migration due to the wars and other factors of push and pull migration are certain challenges which the whole world has to address. And the war is definitely at the most important perspective, especially the Ukraine war. But again, if you notice, the other wars cannot be left out. Thereby, if you notice, all the wars, all the migrations, and including the challenges which is happening after the natural disasters which are affecting, is also something which has to be addressed, because it's all the way same, where people lose everything and now they need to rebuild something. Now, where does this 2020 lead to? 2020 is the new normal that we have learned to live with, because of the reason, if you read this across, Karl Marx, on the book of the Poverty of Philosophy, he just says one thing. He says that after each new strike of any importance, there arises a new machine. Now, what do I call this as the machine? 200 years before, whenever there was a strike in the UK, whenever there was a strike in any countries, what used to come was, it used to be replaced down with machines. Every strike was something where, if you notice, it was replaced by machines that came inside. Now, what is the machine that's going to come after 2020? There was a strike in 2020. The strike was nothing but people were pushed home. They could not come out of their house, right? Which was the COVID, the pandemic. And after the strike is born the new machines. What are the new machines? It's the IoT, the Internet of Things, right? That's the new machine which is born across, which I call this across, that the new normal is now changing inside the whole world that we live inside. And this is where I mentioned down, stating that the societal needs and the economic value creation. Every challenge that arises in the society is the main reason why, if you notice, new industries are born with new values to be given inside the society. And this leads to the creation of new business. What is it for Germany then? What is it for Germany? Today, I see Chancellor Scholz, who is globally going everywhere to every country to address the problems of Germany, right? What are the problems? Because 6 months back, I saw him go to Canada, arrange down for alternate energy. He went to Azerbaijan, arranged down for alternate energy. He went down to Kuwait, arranged down for alternate energy. Saudi Arabia, alternate energy. Now he's there in India. He says that digitization is very important for Germany. So thereby we need modernization. Now why is Chancellor Scholz all running around? The main reason that begins inside is, as I mentioned you, with Karl Marx mentioning down, with every strike, there arises a new machine. And when the new machine arises, the country needs to adapt towards this. And that's where when we notice across, the global inflation is hitting Germany on all the sides. Now, what is that global inflation that I mean? 3 types of global inflations are there. One is the US based, again I'm putting the tripod that we began down. The US is facing a global inflation. The global inflation is because there's a huge demand in US markets. So the central bank wants to crush it down, push people out of their jobs. The other side is inside Europe. There is a supply crisis. In the US, there is a huge demand, whereas in Europe, there is a supply crisis. And on the other side, which is manufacturing and production, the country says that pandemic and thereby everybody is not able to go to work. And thereby, if you notice, production crisis. And all these things are certain things which are affecting the global inflation. This is where, if you remember, the answer comes inside down stating that the challenge which is there is definitely the war which is happening inside Ukraine and Russia. But then what we ignore is the Ukraine war and the Russian war is not the problem of the world. It is a problem of the world, but again, there are other problems that the world is also facing, which is hunger. The moment Russian president stops down the movement of food grains, it kills another part of the world. The moment when if you had known across, there were many countries that went bankrupt. Sri Lanka, they have just 2 billion in their economy, whereas Elon Musk has 55 trillion, right? The economic limitarianism is something that comes inside. And this is where, if you notice, there are many countries which are almost going bankrupt because of the reason that the war is there. And in spite of all these things, if you notice, if a country needs to survive down, it needs to modernize and digitize. And this is where for Germany, they need to change across, especially in the areas of IoT, robotics, artificial intelligence, edge and quantum computing, edge computing. Space economy is something which is taking up, especially you would have noticed the space economy and its importance, especially during the war. When one country had attacked the satellites, there was a private operator who had to give down the satellites. So this is where, if you notice, the space economics is something which is emerging, and this is where Germany needs to step inside. And now comes inside the replacements of the skilled workers to the global workers. Now, there is a question that, does Germany have skilled workers? Germany has skilled workers. But the fact is, those skilled workers are no longer required today, because those skills are not required for the next 20 years. It's all moved down to digitization. Now, there needs to be a development, first factor, of the same existing skilled workers. The second factor that comes inside is there is a high scale of need of global workers, which again, you need to open down the workers to come inside, start working, because now, if you notice, the world is more across such that people ask, there's circulation of labor, which is one of the very important perspectives. And then comes inside the opening of the new industries, because you cannot just stay, because Germany is largely known for 3 main industries: mechanical industries, chemical industries, and again, auto industries, which are there, the mechanical and the auto industries. But then, and the healthcare related products which are there. But then, if you notice, Germany has to expand beyond this, because times are changing. What seemed right for at some point of time has changed across, because there are new nations which are emerging inside. And a new brand value, because it's gone. Today, there are disruptors even in countries. Estonia is offering much more than what Germany can offer in the digitization world. And there comes inside where you need to improve inside the modernization world by offering people with a higher value. And then comes inside the gig workers, the collaborative commons, the collaborative fundings, because especially with entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial economic changing over, there comes inside this. Now, since I also represent the economic advisory with the World Trade Center now with India, now what is there for India? Again, like one of the things is I always put down as India, China being two of the powerful economies. One was the elephant, one is the dragon, which really could not take over in the early 90s, till the early 90s. But after the early 90s, the funding started coming inside. They started growing at a tremendous fast, such that the economic machinery started running at a very high scale. Now, what do they have to offer? A huge population is something that caters to demand, and thereby it creates a market. And that's the reason, if you notice, all the industries want to step inside, which leads to the higher GDP. And this is where, if you notice, a strong demand and a younger population is something which is the strength. And there comes inside where the growing skill force, because education is everything. And the education is not just education, it's about technology-based education is one of the things. And the technology-based education that actually empowers you, that creates you for the future, is one of the most important things. And this is where the skill force is one of the vital things which India has. Emphasis should move from the low-end manufacturing to the high-end manufacturing. Largely, India is manufacturing in low-end. This is one of the biggest advantages that China has, where China is able to produce trains, whereas if you notice, India is able to produce spare parts for the trains. So this makes across the big difference which is down there. And the manufacturing sector should always, this is something which I put for all the nations, that it has to be coupled with innovations. Innovations is the only thing that's going to create your brands to be on top. It could be named Tesla or Rivian, or name the auto cars which are coming inside for the future generations. You always got to be one which I mentioned in the last point, mentioning that you got to be an innovator. If you're not an innovator, at least you're a first mover. But being a last entrant inside, you really do not sustain inside the market, which is one of the biggest things that we got to always keep in mind. This is one of the frameworks that I have designed down that clearly mentions down. The framework, unfortunately, is not so clear. But however, let me just put it down. This is one of the biggest frameworks that I have designed down. How economy can become a powerful economy. Now, this is where, if you notice, any country which is there needs to invest into education. When they invest in education, it leads to skill development. Everybody who come down to Germany, they move into Germany because they want to empower themselves, learn knowledge driven. And once they come inside, it leads to skill development, it leads to innovations, copyrights, patents, which the country is benefited out of this. What does this lead to? It creates the country into a knowledge-based economy. When people move to the idea of US inviting down with its best universities such as the Harvards and the Stanfords, the best advantage that the US got was getting the finest migrants moving inside. And how did it benefit? It created the knowledge-based economy. The knowledge-based economy goes to national savings. The second thing is healthcare. When you have the best healthcare, that's the point of time people start moving towards. You start attracting the best talent coming down towards this. The next one that comes inside is the industrial sectors, which industries do you encourage? This is where I mentioned down stating Germany is encouraging down industries in the auto sector. And now if you notice, the more the sectors start coming inside, the more the industries start emerging inside or within. And then comes inside the infrastructure. This is where Germany is lagging inside. Where is Germany lagging inside? When I mention infrastructure, it's the roadways, it's the railways, it's the airways, but then comes inside one more, which is digital. It's largely seen across as a digital desert. No, it needs to move out of this. And now if you notice, the country is moving towards this because, no, the digital world, the digital infrastructure needs to move ahead so that new entrepreneurs start utilizing the advantage to create more jobs. The last one that comes inside is the national security or the defense, because many countries start investing into national security and defense. How does this lead to for an economy? Investing in national security or defense is something. It comes inside in three perspectives. One is high-scale investments. Countries like Russia invest inside, Russia, US, Saudi Arabia, they invest huge amounts of their GDP inside this. What does this lead to? They export back the weapons. So it brings in money. The second one is countries which are balancing down, which is again low-scale and the medium-scale investors. Today, if you notice, Germany, which was actually spending a lot of money in education and healthcare, is forced to now start spending its money inside defense. And that's the reason, if you notice, it's not able to spend the same money inside education and healthcare. Finally, if you notice, all these lead to national savings, which is the taxation, which the government gets it, and then the government reinvests back inside the government. And thereby, if you notice, it leads to the circulation. It pushes the industry back inside the next generation of industries altogether. So, with this, I thank you, and I am prepared to take the questions.
Thank you very much. I have a couple comments, as I'm always a devil's advocate, right? For the very end, Germany not investing in education and healthcare. We have not been investing in education and healthcare for about 20 years. So the war is just an excuse. And also in Economics 101, you learn that education and healthcare are actually merit goods. So if you invest in education and healthcare, the overall economy will go up. So we should not forget that there's some extra value to investing in education, because then you have a better economy, and also in healthcare, because sick people and so on aren't all very good for the economy either. So I would disagree with that part of the statement. I think it's just
I'm sorry.
It's an excuse, the whole military spending, that now they can't spend on healthcare. They have not spent on healthcare and education before either. And to make it up to like, oh, we have to spend on military spending, we cannot spend in this. Problematic budgeting politics, I wouldn't agree on that. I have more points. You also, I agreed with like 70% of your talk. Like I agree, for instance, that we do have imperialist lifestyles we have to change. I also agree that power translates into economic power, and economic power translates into political power. I think we should even more criticize and talk about that being a problem. I disagree on equality rising. I think equality, in a sense, on paper, GDP between different countries, that might look like more equality. But if we look closer into the countries, then we will see that in many countries in the world, actually inequality within the countries are rising. So we shouldn't look at like GDP or something as like a measurement, because we all know by now GDP is not a proper measurement of health, like overall of people being happy and so on, and being like in a good condition. And it's not a good standard of wealth. So I would disagree on that. I think globally inequality is actually still on the rising, and we see that in hunger. Hunger globally is rising, particularly because there's many wars also in Africa because of conflict and so on. There's many development workers that say hunger is on the rise. Next point, I have another disagreement with you, is to pitch climate change against hunger, because the solving climate change, one of the biggest global emissions is animal agriculture. It's between 25% to 50% of global emissions. It's barely talked about because the animal industrial complex actually has more lobbying money in Germany even than the automobile industry. Just think about the automobile industry in Germany, and think about an industry we seldom talk about that has even more. So what is happening is that the global markets, like for food, are destroyed by animal feed, because Western, or in general rich countries, are buying animal feed, so then there is no wheat for other people. You saw that with Ukraine. When we were talking about Ukraine giving a large percentage of global wheat to Africa, we were talking about a tiny percentage of global overall production of wheat. So what is happening is we are like destroying the rainforest for animal feed. We are feeding animals in the industrialized countries for our human greed. So solving hunger would solve climate change at the same time. Just if we go down from many animal products to less animal products, we would be able to feed 11 billion people, and at the same time we would cut out a large percentage. So very problematic. I understand you come from an economic background. I'm more like a generalist, so I'm like looking at the overall perspective. So let's not like have anybody pitch those two against each other, particularly because hunger a lot of times is an outcome of climate change and natural disasters. It's not that drought is happening and like more extreme from anything, right? It's more extreme from climate change. So anytime somebody comes and says this has to be first, we have to catch them and see it's lying. When we talk about the coal mining, you are pitting now the perspective of what the government used as fake excuses. Because the coal that was underneath of this, I can tell you very much, this coal, first, international treaties would not allow to use this coal. This town, it was an occupied city, right? The occupied mining city by activists. So they cleared up this for capitalism, not because it's needed. Because before they can even get to the coal, it would take 2 years. So they cleaned out the village, saying we need coal now because of the war, because we need energy security. But if you look into the details, engineers and so on say we can't even get to the coal within the next 2 years. But the excuse was, oh, we are now in energy crisis. And there's overall already enough coal open. Lots of disagreement for me.
If I could just reply back, especially on, because I could just follow up with things. Let me begin down with the inequality. The inequality is something which cannot be well defined, because definitely the Gini index gives you the statistics to see this. But then the fact is, a person who says inequality in one country says that I'm unequal in my country, but they're not comparing the inequality with another country, which means that I am considered poor in the US, but then I'm considered rich in, say, for example, another country, a small country, which is, for example, Afghanistan, or like any other country which is there. Now, I'm considered poor because I say that my government is not created, and thereby I'm living in a poor state, but then still I'm able to afford few things, but then I'm considered rich in another country. So thereby we don't have a global platform to create this as one single inequality factor, but then we actually put this as inequality based on every countries. And people do not want to compare themselves with other countries. If I tell them that, so what, you have more wealth than like how much a person has in another country, they do not accept this. They say this, that in my country, I'm poor. So they're not willing to take that up. So inequality is something that people have accepted to live with it. They know that there is inequality, but people have learned to live with it, and they accept that at some point of time, there was this rapid reason for the strikes and the protest. So if it's happening in France today, at some reason, but then that's a different reason behind this. People have now accepted that this is how it is, and if you want to create wealth, you got to work harder. We criticize capitalism, but then we embrace it right now because there's no other alternative model which has come inside. And
I agree on that part. Like, I'm a socialist, so I totally agree on that. Too many people accepted inequality.
And again, with the coal and the sustainable industries which are coming inside, there has to be every challenge that comes inside, it's going to open a new wave of industries, which means that the sustainable development or the sustainable challenges which are coming inside are just going to give an entrepreneur new reasons for starting up a new business, which is going to create more opportunities inside. However, to fund inside, we're not able to start it because the world believed that in 2020, everything will begin. But then all of a sudden, there was a pandemic which hit down, and after that followed by a war. And now if you notice, the industries are now collapsed down from what the positive image that they saw in 2020. Now they are completely in a gloomy image that today Amazon fires down 20,000 people, Salesforce fires down 15,000 people.
But you do know that they had lots of profit. They're not firing people because they don't have the money to pay them, right?
No, the profits again, they are now restructuring because the idea of the business is all about hunt or be hunted, eat or be eaten. So today Google knows that if I do not introduce the new product, Microsoft is going to kill me with the Bing or with the Chat GPT or with the Bard. So whoever seems to have a lot of money tomorrow will file a bankruptcy and say that I'm finished. And that's where the struggle always is there inside the industries, where it's like the jungle. One dies, another one is bound to take over the leadership. So
I'm not seeing Amazon being taken over by anybody if they weren't doing it, but good. It's just, I feel like this is Jeff Bezos' personal money they want to make. Anyhow, so this is not going to be a private fight anymore. I am going to open the round for like 2 more questions if anybody wants to. If not... I have a question. Okay, good.
Thank you, Dr. Didek, for the brilliant speech. I'm a student here in ICT. My name is Ibrahim, and my question is that recently the United States introduced IRS. Sorry, I think it is Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. So, which means just pumping money into the companies to make them competitive against other companies which are from maybe from the EU or from China. So this is like a market intervention, so which goes against the norm held by the US and the EU, which means non-intervention into the market, let the market function by itself. And to compete against this, the EU is going to introduce the similar scheme, just pumping money into the market. So does that mean the US and the EU is abandoning its long-held principle of non-intervention and leaving the liberalism? Thank you.
Brian, thank you, Brian. Just to answer you, Brian, the fact is, on one perspective, you would see this that we encourage markets. One perspective, you notice, we believe in free trade. The United Nations as an institution is there in order to ensure that the trade is something which is fair and ensure markets are getting the same fair treatments across on one perspective. On another side of economics, if you notice, it's very true that oligopoly exists. It's very true that market cartelization exists. It's very true that imperfect competition exists in every market. And seeing this, if you notice, when it comes to larger industries, no country will ever give up the larger firms. Let's take, for example, Huawei, right? Which is one of the firms which the US criticizes. Today, Germany has passed in an order stating that nobody in the government workforces should start using Huawei operators with the cable. Now, why is it so? Because if you notice, China wants its own larger firms to control inside for the future. Right? Similarly, the US also wants to ensure that its own larger firms are able to control inside the industry which is for the future. Because please remember something, there's something which is called as a blue ocean innovation. At the same time, if you notice, when you're opening down a new market altogether, you got to be a monopoly inside that market. If you're a monopoly in the market, you're able to be a leader in the market. If you're a leader in the market, that's where, if you notice, your leadership is converted into wealth and your wealth is converted into power. But the moment your large industry is collapsed down because you want to speak about fairness, then if you notice, your whole country is bound to fail in the future. So it's true that fair trade is encouraged in the United Nations. Free trade is encouraged in the United Nations. There's no denial about this. But again, if you notice, it's also true that imperfect competition exists inside where cartelization is there. Oligopolies are prevalent. At the end of the day, industries are industries who are there only to create wealth. And the wealth is what reflects inside geopolitical dominance for the countries as well. Am I answering you, Brian? Thanks.
So now we are a little bit over time, but we have a wonderful music part. So I thank you and I thank the audience. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you, Mark.